Now you're on tracking sheet section 26.
Yep, that's the Office of the Governor tracking sheet, section 26. And we're supportive of the adjustments. I'm Bonnie Holliday, the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. And I'm just going to walk you through the adjustments as they're listed here. We're supportive of these. If you look down all the way at the bottom, 26.12 is where the Office of Student Achievement starts. There's an adjustment in telecommunications, and then the more substantial reductions are from...
Excuse me, would you pull the microphone down where it's going to pick you up? There you go.
There you go.
Thank you.
I should have just worn higher heels, I guess. 26.12.1 is our first adjustment, and that's just telecommunications amounts. The more substantial reductions come from 26.12.2, which is contractual services, and 26.12.3, which is personal services. We managed the reductions to contractual services because we saved a little money on our National Student Clearinghouse contract that GOSA maintains on behalf of the state. And we also started doing things a little bit more efficiently with the publication of our report card. We recently switched from paying DOE to host the servers on which we publish the report card and our site, and we now own those, and so we're able to do that a little bit more efficiently on our own. And the bulk of our reduction comes from personal services, and that's also a result of being able to do publish our report card a little more efficiently. We were able to eliminate one data mining specialist position, and those are all of our changes.
Questions? I'll ask one.
Okay.
With what's coming out of Race to the Top, are we going to see in the next year we're going to have to bring back that data mining specialist?
No, that's a position that's permanently that's a position that we're not planning to fill ever again, because it was really a position that was dedicated to some manual uploading of data that we will never have to do that type of labor-intensive uploading for the report card again, because through Race to the Top we are leveraging this big P20 data system at GOSA, and so we're able to auto-populate more of the report card than we have been in the past, especially the post-secondary portion. So that's a huge chunk that will just auto-populate through the system to which the post-secondary institutions already contribute data, so they won't have to contribute it again for us to hand verify and manually upload.
Okay. As Race to the Top winds down, what impact is that going to have on OSA?
The big impact will be we will have to have a couple of positions for the management of this P20 data system, and that will be the big add to GOSA. And we are working with our OPB analysts, talking them through some things already, and of course we'll continue to work with them in the spring and this summer, and then that will be the ask that comes next year.
For the FY15 budget?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. Professional Standards Commission.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. And before I really start my remarks, I want to thank you and the Office of Planning and Budget for supporting our agency's move from 2 Peachtree to the West Tower. GBA did a terrific job for us on the move. Our move went very smoothly, and we're extremely happy with our new home. So thank you and OPB for supporting that move. I'll now begin my remarks by briefly describing our agency's core functions and some of our current work that may be of particular interest to you. Our agency is charged with carrying out all work concerning the certification and licensing of over 300,000 current certification holders. We approve all programs that prepare educators and work with colleges, universities, RESAs, and other providers to ensure their programs meet rigorous quality standards. Another core function is educator ethics, and we receive on average 125 new ethics cases every month. We administer educator testing through GACE assessments and our agency conducts the Title II-A teacher quality work for our state through a grant provided via the Department of Education. Some of the work currently on our front burner that I think you might have interest in, joint legislation with DECAL. We are currently working with the Department of Early Care and Learning to develop changes in Georgia Code that would be necessary to give the Professional Standards Commission authority over approximately 3,200 early learning and care centers in our state for the purpose of licensing, preparation, and ethics. Commissioner Cagle and I and our respective agencies believe that working together we can improve the services and care that our youngest children receive. Race to the Top. Our agency has led Race to the Top work on induction, alternative routes to leadership certification, and accountability measures for colleges, universities, and RESAs that prepare educators. We are currently leading Race to the Top work that will completely restructure certification and educator preparation in our state, and this will probably come in the form of PSC rule and will likely result in the most impactful rule change at PSC in at least the last decade. Our certification upgrade rule, which I briefly discussed with you last year. We are aggressively implementing the certification upgrade rule that we passed a year ago. This rule restores the value of advanced degrees by requiring that they be from an institution that meets high-quality standards and also requires that the degree be in a field for which we offer a certificate. CRCT cases. We are now currently finishing up the 48 CRCT cases in Dougherty County given to us by the special investigators. We have finished all of the APS CRCT cases except 41. These 41 cases cannot go to the Commission until the District Attorney releases his investigative files. We have been waiting over a year for the release of these files. Professional learning. Funds have been added to our PSC budget for FY14, not amended 13, but FY14, to link professional learning to performance and to require for recertification that an educator be able to demonstrate that their professional learning had a positive impact on their performance. To the best of my knowledge, we are the first state in the nation to undergo this work. The successful completion of this work will add great value to the investment that you make each year in professional learning and have a positive impact on student achievement. And lastly, outreach. There continues to be significant turnover in the ranks of K-12 administrators and HR personnel, as well as in the colleges of education. With new educators, as well as an increase in alternative education preparation programs and charter schools, we continue to add new customers. Couple turnover and new customers with rule, policy, and procedural changes, and the result is that training, information sessions, and other assistance have become paramount in all areas of our work. Now I'll move to budget. The Governor's recommendation to reduce our budget by $179,696 includes the 2% cut that we submitted, as well as 2 adjustments to telecom. In addition, the Governor recommended 0.5% increase to the employer's share of the state health benefit plan for the second half of the fiscal year. However, contrary to prior years when any increase to the employer's share was funded in agencies' budgets, this time no additional funding was provided to cover the increase. In FY13, this amounts to an additional unanticipated cost of approximately $7,126, and I know in most agencies that wouldn't be a large amount of money, but to us it is. If you turn to page 2 of the Governor's Office tracking sheet, section 26, you'll see the Georgia Professional Standards Commission under 26.8. Line 26.8.1 provides for a $2,163 adjustment to meet increased telecom costs. Line 26.8.2 shows a $3,214 reduction in telecom. Line 26.8.3 reflects a $57,000 reduction in computer charges. Line 26.8.4 reflects a $71,000 reduction in contractual services. line 26.8.5 reflects a $50,645 reduction in operating expenses. Looking at the big picture of the Professional Standards Commission budget, we have managed these and previous cuts by eliminating state fund support for the Master Teacher Program, eliminating state fund support for our educator recruitment effort, eliminating our research department at PSC, eliminating financial support for Georgia TAP teachers, eliminating the leadership positions of Director of Certification and Director of Policy and Communications, reducing funds to maintain and enhance agency technology, reducing operating hours for our call center, changing the educator preparation approval review cycle from every 5 years to 7 years, and conducting many reviews electronically, reducing our state-funded workforce from approximately 74 filled positions 5 years ago to a current low of 51 filled positions at PSC. The roughly 2% cut recommended for this current fiscal year, coming on the heels of previous cuts, reduces our operating budget to bare bones levels. Since FY 2008, our workload has increased while our state budget has been cut from $7.142 million to $5.775 million, a reduction of 19%. Over the past 5 years, we have made budget decisions that protect our core functions, allow us to serve our clients in the best and most efficient way, and maintain high morale and productivity of our staff. We will continue this practice as we manage these latest cuts. I want to close by repeating what I said to you last year. While the reductions have been difficult, I want to thank you for treating our agency fairly over the past 5 years. We understand the difficult position you are in, and we have tried as an agency to support the difficult decisions that you have had to make each year. I hope as state revenues continue to improve that you will entertain a budget enhancement for our agency so that we can continue to serve our clients effectively and efficiently, but we know this will not happen in amended 13 or in FY 14. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes the remarks.
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Henson, for coming over.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate this. You were talking about the discussion you'd had about bringing, I think, the pre-Ks in under your purview, I believe. Is that something we're...
Yes, sir. Commissioner Cagle and I have been talking about that. We are currently working on some changes in Georgia code that would enable the Professional Standards Commission to have jurisdiction over licensing, preparation, and ethics. Without going into huge detail, it could be a very seamless procedure. It would be very non-threatening to those practitioners in the field, but we do believe over time that we could really improve preparation services and very effectively deal with any kinds of ethics issues that would arise.
Will there be any transfer of funds with that purview coming to your agency? Have you got any money coming from the other department to help you? Because I don't know how you can do this with the funds you've got.
We couldn't.
I didn't think so at all.
It's 3,200 units and probably, tens of thousands of new clients that we would be picking up.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Cagle and I have discussed that, and he would be transferring some funds to PSC to take care of this work. We would start off with a minimal transfer, and then as we got into the work, we would see how labor intensive it was, but we've discussed the details of the transfer of some funds.
That was my concern, your budget situation and the cuts you've taken already, how you could afford to move in that
Capacity
area.
was my only real concern in terms of this work, because I think our two agencies working together can do some very good things with our youngest and most vulnerable learners, but capacity was an issue.
Okay. One other question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. You said you got 51 field positions now, and one time you had, I think, 70-something positions. Are those, any of those still open but not filled that you're budgeted for or hoping to fill?
I'm aware that we have one or two open positions that are not filled. One, you know, the state assigns each agency a number of positions. We are well short of the number of positions assigned to our agency. When I came to PSC 5.5 years ago, we had 74 filled state-funded positions. Today we have 51 filled state-funded positions, and I believe we're going to try to fill one more in the reasonably near future, which would bring us to 52.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate what you do. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Representative Clanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Henson, thank you. I have a question for you. There appears to be a national movement for national certification for teachers, as opposed to having a requirement for practice in Florida and South Carolina, the Gates in Georgia and Mississippi certifications. And, of course, most states having reciprocity. How would that impact the budget of the PSC? Are we involved in those talks, and do you see that as savings in the future moving forward, that national certification?
We've been involved in discussions for the past several years about that. Several states, although not too many, have embraced that. It would provide some difficulties in Georgia. Our certification, and I'll just give you one of many examples, our GACE test, which is the competency test in content that our educators take, is totally aligned to the Georgia Performance Standards, soon to be Common Core, and so we base our credentialing on what Georgia educators need to learn and know and be able to teach children. And that doesn't always match up with what a national organization might do. But we've been very open to those conversations. We retain some interest in the conversation, but as has been the case in most states, we haven't fully embraced that at this point.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always depressing to hear from you.
I am
I can
so
hear
sorry.
now I can hear the frustration in your voice. So I just
No.
but I well, I think that's across the board for everyone. But on the expansion of the units with the child care, is that Georgia pre-K or is that all child care?
That would be all child care.
Oh, okay.
And let me make one other comment. Maybe a little bit of frustration, but my comments about our agency being treated fairly were sincere and accurate. Vis-a-vis what y'all have had to deal with, our agency has been treated fairly. That doesn't mean that it's been easy for us, and it hasn't been easy for you, but we hadn't been picked on or singled out. We've been treated fairly, and that we do appreciate.
That's good to know. Thank you.
How has have the cuts over the last few years translated into wait times for teachers recertifying or initial certificates?
I will tell you, when I became a teacher in 1971, I got my certificate in February or March, 6-7 months after I started working. We had gotten it down to PSC where a routine certification case was generally turned over and the certificate provided within 48 hours. That is probably the fastest certification turnover time in the nation. Because of the budget cuts, we have had to make some alterations to that, and now our time to turn around, if you will, a routine certification case would be more along the lines of 8 to 10 days. That is still probably in the top 5% nationally. We'd love to get it back to a day or two. We have tried to make the cuts as seamless and as invisible as we can to those that we serve, but it has increased a bit the amount of turnaround time for a cert case. Yes, sir.
What about in the area of the arena of the ethics cases? Set aside the two major areas there.
It hasn't impacted what we're going to classify as cases in which children are harmed. If there's a sexual abuse case, a physical abuse case, it has not slowed us down. We put those at the top of the list. We obviously have attempted to put the CRCT cases at the top of the list, been able to do that with Dougherty County for reasons that I described to you, haven't been able to do it with APS. Where it has slowed us down, Mr. Chairman, would be on cases where no charm is harm. Theft might be an example, and we get a number of cases regarding ethics that do not result in harm to a child, and those have gone to the back burner, and those probably have been delayed at least a month or two, sometimes maybe 3.
Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, we appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Early Care and Learning Department. We've talked about giving away some of your funds, so you want to come defend yourselves?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm Bobby Cagle. I'm the Commissioner at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. I would say in response to that Kelly Henson and I have worked very closely. This is actually a good example of government working the way it ought to work. We meet regularly with the Alliance of Education Agency heads, so we know what's going on in every agency. I think this conversation actually grew out of work that we've done historically, but it also is us looking at our department and saying, you know, what are the things that we need to do, what are the functions we need to perform if we're going to raise the level of quality in our child care facilities around the state. What we determined was that we needed to do something very similar to what was being done with public school teachers in PSC. And so therefore we began the conversation and have come to an agreement that we could do that, transfer the necessary funds from our department, as opposed to setting up a whole new section within our department to perform those functions. We're very excited about it. Just to carry you through on our tracking sheet, we're in section 21, page 5 of 11, and at 21.1, that's our Child Care Services Division. That division is charged with licensing and monitoring about 6,200 facilities around the state with a license capacity of 350,000 children annually. We also in that area administer the Child Care Subsidy Program. Many of you will recall that last session we transferred this program from the Department of Human Services to the Department of Early Care and Learning so we could take a new educational focus with those funds. In 21.1.1, the funds there that are referenced, there's a $1.627 million cut. That would meet our 3% requirement from the governor's office. That's something that we think we can do because service levels are at the point we can save that kind of money for 1 year. And so we put that forward. That does come with a additional loss of federal funds. However, we think we can continue at current service levels or even higher and be able to sustain that cut. You would note that it is not carried forward into the FY14 budget. At 21.1.2, we are proposing to replace a portion of the Chief Financial Officer's salary with existing federal funds. He performs many functions related to the federal programs we operate, and we can therefore use those funds for that purpose. At 21.1.3, reduced funds for contractual services, very small amount. That is coming out of our board expenses. 21.2 has no changes. That is our nutrition services program. We operate the corollary to the school lunch program for child care facilities around the state. That section also is devoted to summer food programs, which delivers many meals to communities throughout the state to children during the summertime. These are for typically for underprivileged. We also are operating a new at-risk food program sponsored by the USDA. Some of you may have seen a national report in the news on Burke County and their use of the at-risk food program to feed their football team. And that is a permitted function, and so we're administering that as well. That program served in excess of 80 million meals through contracts with vendors around the state last year. 21.3 is our pre-kindergarten program. I think most of you know that we're in our 20th year of pre-K. We also have some very exciting research coming out that will help guide us for the coming years in how we improve quality within that program. In 21.3.1, you'll see a reflection of an adjustment to telecommunications expenses. That is a statewide adjustment, I think, amongst all departments. 21.3.2, increasing funds for the employer share of FICA. Quality initiatives, as you see at 21.4, is the section that deals with quality improvement throughout our agency. One of the things that will be coming out of that division soon is a revision of the Georgia Early Learning and Development Standards, and those are being authored by two of the foremost experts in the nation on that, and they will be returning those to us very soon. That will guide our training of pre-K teachers as well as teachers for infants and toddlers on up. It's aligned with the Common Core and with the Head Start performance standards, and it will be a true improvement. Mr. Chairman, that's our budget.
Are there questions? Looks like you got them.
Thank you very much.
Is Scott here yet? Okay, we can start deducting from the education budget. 100,000 a minute? That sounds like your billing time. Well, we will stand at ease for a few moments until the Department of Education arrives. What time is it? What time is this scheduled? 2:15.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll stay with you. Okay, all right, do your thing. He just wore me out.
Tom, do you want to act like you're presenting for him up here? Well, I mean, we'll just give him a little scare. In the absence of Scott, I think we're going to go ahead and cancel this meeting. Oh. Okay. We're glad you're here, Scott. Our elevator. Yes. Well, yeah, it runs about 15 minutes slow. Okay, we're going to be on section 23 of your tracking sheet, starting with 23.1. Because yours is relatively lengthy, although I know you're going to move through it rapidly, instead of waiting till the end to ask if there are questions, if you have a question as he's going through, if you'll press your button, we'll try to get the questions as we go. And I know one or two of you have to leave, so when it's appropriate, you can go. Okay, Scott. Wait a minute. There is no microphone there, and because we're being streamed, we need for you, it's going to be a little less convenient, but we're going to need for you to be over there. I don't know what happened to the microphone there.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I close this computer and just, I don't want to.
Skip will hold papers for you if you need for him to.
He can dance too, but not sing, so he was fired. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will be talking about the 13 supplemental budget, as you pointed out. Mr. Chairman, it starts on what I have is 23.1 on your tracking document, and that is the program referred to as agricultural education. I will mention just at the outset that the governor's instructions, as you probably heard, were to cut 3% from the bottom lines of most of the agencies. Now, we're very grateful for the fact that in the K-12 budget, we did not cut 3% from QBE, and we did not cut 3% from equalization. And that was a significant addition to our budget, and we'll point that out when we get to it. But for the purposes of moving through, as we go to a program, if the reduction is approximately 3%, it shows that it is relatively budget neutral from the prioritization perspective. In the area of agricultural education, this program is being reduced 3%. I will mention that the department had anticipated a 3% reduction both for this program and also CTAE technology instruction, which you'll see later. We had instructed our program staff to begin working toward that, so we have not yet allocated the full balance of what was in the original 13 budget. If I may, Mr. Chairman, the one recommendation we might make here is that while the governor's this tracking document is very specific about the subprograms, in the past we have come back and worked with you all to suggest which of the programs we might take a different amount from. So in other words, instead of taking a 3% reduction across the board in all of the subprograms, what we'd like to do is come back to you and tell you which of the programs could take a larger cut without having as much impact. It's our preference, and I know the governor's preference, to reduce this budget in all areas less from those subprograms which impact direct instruction or that are as close to the classroom as possible. So in the case of agricultural education, it will be the extended day program that we would be most interested in protecting, if you will. And so what we may be asking for is a slight modification to the numbers themselves in terms of the subprograms. But as a reminder, Mr. Chairman, this is all something that can be done through budget now because it's within a program. But because it's in the tracking document, we just want to be clear with the House and Senate and Governor's office as it goes through that if we do end up making changes that are changes from this tracking sheet, for example, instead of $90,000 out of extended day a year, it might be 60. We just want to make sure everybody is familiar with that.
I think for the last couple of years we've put language in on particularly on Ag Ed and Career Tech that indicated that it was could be spread out as
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's
allow
correct.
that flexibility.
That's actually what we're asking.
And I think we would do the same this year.
Moving next to our program referred to as Central Office. This is a 3% reduction in the Central Office. We've talked in the past about the fact that the Central Office is really three major parts. It's IT, it's program staff, and it's also what many people think of when they think of the Central Office, which is more administrative, the State Board of Education, policy, those kinds of things. This 3% reduction includes $470,000, which would be transferred or done as a contract for the purpose of providing continued support for the Discovery contract with GPB. The Discovery contract provides digital resources and digital support in the area primarily of science for our teachers. And it is actually not just the Discovery channel that you might watch on television. It is, in fact, a web-hosted application that provides support directly to teachers. So there's actually a sign-on with teachers. We have a little over 4 million hits, or so is reported to us, on the Discovery program by our educators who are going on and looking to bring down resources to use in the classroom or to use in their learning, whatever it is that they're doing. So the Discovery contract is actually a continuation of a contract that has been in place with GPB, and the goal here is to provide funds for this contract through the Department of Education's budget. I will mention there's discussion about the reduction of the nurse position. That is actually not a change to the idea of having the nurse coordinator. The governor is capturing the funds from the fact that we had not yet hired the nurse until January. So there was a period of time when this position was vacant. So that is not suggesting a change to having the nurse position. It's only a method of capturing the funds that were not expended for that purpose. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll just keep moving down. If I don't answer a question,
So far,
ask
nobody's
questions, or I'll
asked
come
one.
back to the end. Charter schools. These are facility grants and planning grants. They are different. The facility grants in the charter school area.
Let me back you up.
Yes, sir.
The superintendent's leadership program in central office. 23.2.
Yes, the superintendent's leadership program is a contract that we provide resources to GSSA, School Boards Association, and they have a program to support middle management education staff in moving toward becoming superintendents. So it's really working on that pipeline of middle management to slightly senior educators who are heading toward leadership positions as superintendents. It's something that GSSA has supported completely except for our contribution, and the amount of contribution we have provided in past years has been anywhere from $40,000 to $70,000 or so. The governor's view is that GSSA will provide the funding for this contract through their normal fees. So it won't probably eliminate the program, but it will cause the other sponsoring entities to provide a bit more in the way of providing this pipeline training, if you will, for superintendents.
Is this the only such program we have in the state?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's the only such program that we have in the Department of Education's budget. I don't know if it's in anybody else's. I don't know if it's anybody else's.
Shaking his head that yes, it's the only one. So.
Okay. And since we're K-12, this is tied towards superintendents. I would imagine that this would be the appropriate place.
We might want to work on that one. Charter schools?
Again, this is a 3% reduction to the charter schools. There are two areas of the grant, and they're materially different, two subprograms, but each will sustain about a 3% reduction. The planning grants are the grants that are relatively small dollar amounts, about $8,000, that are provided to various community organizations who are interested in starting up a charter school. Oftentimes it's at the preliminary stages. In some cases it goes to these community organizations who are interested in starting a charter school who are fairly far along the path, but they have not yet gotten their full charter approval and set up all the documentation, etc. Because it's a pipeline, it's first come, first serve. It's hard to talk about or know what the programmatic impact would be. I can say that we have already done, the department's already allocated 2 rounds of these planning grants, so this balance is remaining. So the programmatic impact for this fiscal year would simply be that any future planning grants that we would have given out for this year would have to be carried into next year.
2 rounds would be how many dollars? How much in dollars?
Oh, is it about 70? Might be. I'll get you the number. It's less than 70,000.
And they're like at $8,000 a
Oh, I'm sorry. Each
location?
recipient would receive about $8,000, and what our program staff does is take the applications and look at them to determine which ones seem to be credible from the perspective of actually coming forward with something in the near-term future. And they come to our state board at different times. So when the first round was put together and brought to the board, those were the ones that had qualified. We've gotten to the second round where, again, we've had a number of a number of community organizations that have come forward.
At one point, we had some conversation about whether or not that money wouldn't be better used or implemented by contracting with a consultant who would be available for any group that was wanting to start a charter school, rather than having them have to take that money and go out on their own and find something.
You are correct, and there is a portion of this that in last year's budget was utilized for a consultant who did just that. It was a consultant to go out and work with these same groups, same purpose, which would be to assist local community members who were interested in starting up a charter school. I believe there was an intent, and still is an intent, to spend about $30,000 on that contract, but I will have to get the number for you.
Okay.
And I do not believe that we've taken
Is that planning grant statutorily created, or?
I don't believe 881 would be where it is, but I don't believe it was statutorily placed into the language of 881. I believe it was just part of the budget.
You remember
So set up as a
Representative Jones?
program. Yes, ma'am. The other portion relates to the facility grants, and the facility grants this is the place where we provide funding to charter schools who do not have access to capital outlay funds, so they don't have access to bonding funds. So we provide some degree of support to those charter schools. Again, it's on the recipients might change year to year. The amount is based on the applications from these charter schools, and it's a 3% reduction. We have in past years had some amounts that could have been left over. In other words, programmatically, 3% will probably not be a large impact. But again, year to year, we get different numbers of requests. This year, we have not had a large number of requests, which would suggest that we would need all of the funding for this year. But we normally do accept requests throughout the year. So again, similar to what we said earlier, what it will mean is that allowing additional cohorts to come in and request funds for the balance of the year will not be feasible with the 3% cut. But that's not abnormal. Frankly, most of our best projects have already been funded in the first and second rounds. The Communities in Schools reduction is a 3% reduction. Federal programs does not include state funding.
What about curriculum development?
Yeah, I've got too many of these. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking for actually your tracking document. I've
23.5.1 and 2.
The curriculum development line, again, these are reductions for operating expenses. The contracts and regular operating, they have not really been tied. We have not yet figured out exactly what that reduction will be. However, we do know there are a number of relatively small contracts that we do through this line. This is where we are developing curriculum for the Common Core, as well as developing curriculum for any of our curricula throughout the state. So we're really doing it as a as needed on an as needed basis. So we will be able to plan in for the reduction for this fiscal year, 13 supplemental.
Okay. But that represents 3%, the 87,907.
Well, yes, sir. Well, this is where I have to crosswalk because I have the percentages on a different sheet, and your tracking document didn't have that.
I've been told it's 7%.
3%. No, that's the virtual school.
She said, our analyst says it's 7%.
Yeah.
She's very trustworthy.
Well, I'm going to go with 7%. And we have certainly analyzed the dollar
8%?
amounts. We've looked at the dollar amounts. Curriculum development. Okay. Well, I apologize. But the comment would be the same. We have looked at the impact of the contractual reduction as well as the operating expense reduction. We don't believe it will have a material impact on the development activities.
Federal programs?
Federal programs has no state dollars. GLRS would be the same. The Georgia Virtual School.
Do you have the cost today? I think you were going to try and have the cost today of a segment of virtual school through that the DOE provides.
We, what we provide?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Well, our segments are statutorily $250 a segment, and that could be doubled up if it's a full segment for a year, so it's up to $500. That's for the Georgia Department of Education's this line item. That's very different from the virtual education provided by, say, Odyssey or some of the other virtual schools, which are complete schools.
Right.
This particular program supports what the Georgia Department of Education provides, which is course by course. The intent originally and continues to be primarily providing AP courses for all of the high schools throughout Georgia. The important distinction is that the scores and the grades go back to the school and go back to the district, because we are not intending to be a full school. We're intending to be a course or several courses, depending on how many the school system chooses to elect or how many the student takes.
So basically, 6 full segments for a year is a $3,000 cost.
Again, we would not, yes, it is, but we would not look at 6 full segments for us because we're not a school.
Right.
If you will.
I understand that.
Yes, sir. That would be the cost. And if you, just by extension, wanted to compare that to Odyssey or Georgia Connections or some of the other virtual schools that are commissioned state special charter schools, I can't speak to the cost, but the funding side would be slightly higher simply because there is some additional funding that goes in, but not as much as
How
what
much?
we put in for the brick and mortar. Well, on the commission,
An FTE, one full FTE earns a virtual school how much?
no, I think you're asking the combination of the additional grant on top of the QBE funds. I think that is the better question. I apologize. I have a number here, but I have the total amount that is spent in that line item for the enhancements for the commission. I don't have it by segment. But
A full FTE, Odyssey School, how much would they get for or any of the virtual schools? That just happens to be the name I know.
Well, I can say this, and we'll get you the exact number. It'll be an estimate because the different programs earn different amounts of QBE.
I won't hold you to the penny.
For the operating portion, and we're talking the supplemental grant, which would go in addition to whatever QBE is funded, we are only paying 2/3 of the operating segment. And then the capital portion of the supplemental grant is not paid at all to the virtual. The capital portion only goes to the brick and mortar charter schools. So it would be 2/3 of the segment from the operating, a little over $2,400. So you're talking close to $5,000 in total. But we'll get you the exact number.
Okay. Thank you. Didn't mean to throw you off.
No, sir. GYSTC, moving to the next program, if I may, is $36,000 reduction. And I believe that's 3%. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Our 3% reduction was $4,000. So this is a recommendation. I don't know what the exact percent is. Probably close to 25% because the intent is to eliminate funding in the last quarter of the year. And that's consistent with the governor's proposal, what we'll see for 2014, of eliminating funds for this program in 2014. The Governor's Honors Program is a 3% reduction. And we anticipate that the Governor's Honors reduction will be offset by funds that we're raising in the foundation, which was established for this purpose. So we have a fundraising activity underway. It's a relatively small amount, $28,000, which we believe will be more than compensated for with the foundation funds that get put in for this purpose.
In my fundraising efforts, 28,000 is a relatively large number, but have we had any indication of how successful they're being in the fundraising?
I know they had about 10,000, but they've just sent some more letters out. Let's put it this way. Again, sorry, just to put it into context, when I say it's a relatively small number, if they had all of their alumni give $1, they'd have well more than the 28,000 that they needed. And it was the thought that certainly not all alumni would be providing that, but there would be folks that would give $5 or $10 or maybe $15. And that's really the way we've set up the foundation. There's on our website, when a donor goes on the website, they're able to go in and donate specifically for the Governor's Honors Program. And then, of course, we track it very specifically. So I'll get you the exact balance today, but I'll also tell you that the requests went out or have gone out, and it's our anticipation that we will see funds coming in.
Okay.
It's our expectation that the folks of this program will be able to generate the $28,000 in a year.
Is there a reduction in the number of weeks again for this round?
No, Mr. Chairman, there's not a reduction in the number of weeks. It used to be 6 weeks. It has gone down to 4 weeks. This $28,000, again, our first intention is to provide the donated funds to make up for the shortfall.
So it's going to be the same length as it was last summer?
Yes, sir. It's 4 weeks, and I believe we went to 4 weeks 2 years ago. It used to be 6 weeks. The reduction was a lot larger in those years. So this $28,000 is a relatively small reduction compared to what we've done in the past, where we've made programmatic changes. So the intent here will be to continue with the same number of students in the program and to continue with a 4-week program. And we believe that this $28,000 reduction will be compensated for with donations for the program, to the program. We'll keep you apprised of that. The technology services contract, there's no reduction, but as a reminder, in this particular line item, all that's left is E-rate. That's the contract that we have with AT&T, the current provider, or any provider that provides bandwidth and computer access for the school systems. The contract itself is not really subject to negotiation. It is what it is, so we pay 1/4 of the cost and the federal government pays 3/4 of the cost. The actual cost is whatever school systems submit for reimbursement. We don't believe it will change, and that's why there's no change here. There's a 3% reduction to the next program, which is non-QBE, which is really what remains in the non-QBE program, or the residential treatment center grants. These are supplemental funds that go to the centers in addition to whatever QBE numbers or dollars that they would earn. So these are supplemental grants.
Sparsity grants?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, get right. In 14 is where they're eliminating Right. There is a reduction to sparsity. Sparsity has already become pretty sparse. It's very small relative to the total programmatic need, and so we will certainly have more of a discussion about it, I'm sure, when we get to 14. But the governor's recommendation in fiscal year 13 is a small reduction to the sparsity grant as well as the RTCs.
Has there been any evaluation of what the impact is going to be on the systems who currently receive sparsity grants?
Well, this is for 2014. If we look forward, yes, we do believe there will be some impact, some very negative impact for the small systems that are receiving sparsity. The reason for the governor's recommendation, which is to move it out of the sparsity lines and put it back into QBE, is because sparsity has not really been evaluated to provide it to everyone who potentially could earn it. Historically, we would come back and ask for an increase year after year, and the amount would be appropriated. The line item has not been increased for many years. It's been reduced, and I think the governor's zero-based budget review suggested that sparsity has become sort of a vestige program, and therefore the recommendation that the governor will be making for 2014 is to move that in, just take it out of something called sparsity, which goes to a few systems, and move it into QBE generally. We do believe and we do know that the school systems that are currently receiving sparsity there will be a negative impact for them for next year, and we're talking with them now, so we'll bring together some additional information for you, for the governor's office, to talk about what that impact might be when we discuss 2014.
Yes, I'd like to see that before we begin the work on 14. I mean, we take several $1 million out. Sparsity grant total is what
2.5.
2.6.
2.6 million.
Take 2.6 million away from what one would assume would be the most needy systems in the state. You would think that there would be a fairly significant impact on those few systems. So I really like to see.
Yes, sir. We will bring that forward when we get to talk about the 2014 budget.
Thank you.
The school nutrition reduction is a 7% reduction, which is slightly higher than the 3%. The comments continue to be those which we had in previous years, where we've taken slightly higher than the neutral cut amount, and the reason being, again, the state funds in the school nutrition program comprise less than 4% of the overall spend and revenue in this program, firstly. And secondly, it is a proprietary model, which means that the school systems have the ability to adjust their operations, which means reduce cost, or in some cases increase prices if necessary to offset this relatively small reduction. What we have seen are prices that are fluctuating and going higher, and the impact they're larger than what would have been caused by the impact of our change in the state funding. And we'll get you some additional information on that, but the federal government, for example, has asked our districts to start increasing the prices of their lunches for the non-free and reduced students, because some of our districts had very low pricing. And so that's a way of saying that the preponderant funder of school nutrition in Georgia is the federal government, and they're requiring school districts to start changing their pricing profile so that they're going to be raising their prices anyway.
Again, I would say, as I have several times when we've talked about this, that I would like for us to move very cautiously in continuing to take large cuts, what are for that program large cuts. They are maybe not large in comparison to some other things, but we're going to get to the point where it's going to be 50% of zero is still zero.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
I mean, I know we have to maintain a level of maintenance of effort and some other things, but when that's the only real state funds that we put into nutrition, I think we need to be careful about continuing to cut above what if the government recommends 3%, then maybe we need to stick to 3% on that one for a year or two.
Yes, sir. And I would also point out, while, again, the school systems have the ability, because it's a proprietary model, to actually raise prices or change operations, What we intend, what I believe is intended with these nutrition funds is to impact the school nutrition directors and the leadership staff in the school. So I think to your point, Mr. Chairman, while it's a relatively small amount when you consider all the meals and what's being purchased and the raw materials, et cetera, our program center and our influence centers around those school nutrition directors, and so what we're paying are supplements for those directors. And I would agree that as we start to reduce the amount of supplement we provide to those directors, we start to lose that ability to have share of mind in the leadership structure of those school nutrition programs.
Yeah, I'd say we're getting down close to the bottom on that one.
There is no reduction proposed for the preschool handicap, so similar to QBE, we appreciate that. That's protection for that particular program. QBE equalization, again, no reduction is proposed. It is the second largest item in the K-12 budget. No change to the local 5 mil share. Of course, this is a contra revenue account anyway, so there's no change there. Then the large change would be the QBE program itself. First comment I'd like to make is that the governor is recommending full funding of the QBE growth, and we appreciate that. Many of you have probably heard by now that the growth this year is as high as it has not been this high since 2008, and it's a little over 1.34%. But much of that growth is actually coming in brick and mortar. In the intervening years since 2008, what little growth we had was primarily in the virtual schools, a lot of the virtual charter schools in particular. So this is the first year where we saw a large increase in brick and mortar growth. And I would point out as we start to look at the numbers that it appears that about 25% of the growth is in kindergarten and the initial schools. And we think that's a positive sign because it does suggest that these are potentially kids that are going to be, that our student populations are actually increasing. And it's not just the result of kids moving in and out. That tends to be a little bit more volatile with parents moving in later grades and then maybe inclined to leave. So when you see growth at the kindergarten, first, second grade levels, typically that means it's a family that's moved in, and you're probably going to have more stability in the enrollment numbers.
Now, well, just as a clarification, when we say fully funding midterm adjustment, we're not talking about funding it at the maximum level, the full level of what an FTE would earn. It's at the austerity level. Is that correct?
The midterm growth is funded at
the same level that we're just not adding any more reductions to that midterm growth. Is that
correct? There's no reduction to the midterm growth, so it is fully funded. Now there are elements in QBE because it has gotten actually very complicated with Senate Bill 10 and charter supplements and the Governor's Commission charter supplements. There are a lot of things underneath that show up in this number. I don't want to suggest that all of those are totally funded. We're working with the budget offices so that everybody understands what the Governor's recommending vis-a-vis those programs. But in terms of growth, we are fully funding, the Governor's recommending fully funding the growth amount.
And I
unlike
appreciate that.
some years where we have funded growth and then increased austerity, that was probably bad.
Good.
In this recommendation, the Governor is fully funding growth and not increasing austerity amounts. There's no increase to the austerity cut.
Step increases for teachers are included in that?
Yes, sir, they are. They are included in T&E.
I had to answer an email to a teacher this morning who was under the impression that they weren't getting step increases, and I had to point out that that was a part of the midterm adjustment.
Yes, sir, it is. The step increases, the T&E is included in the QBE adjustment. Statutorily, all districts are required to pay off of the salary schedule. There are changes that are occurring in a lot of the districts vis-a-vis the local supplements. And of course, there are requirements for public hearings, et cetera. There are two, I believe, districts that are able to waive the salary schedule, but that's as a result of the IE squared contract. That would be Gwinnett, and maybe Rowan City. There's at least one. Gwinnett's the large one. But that was part of the IE squared contract, and there may be, I think, a provision for some districts as they come forward if they decide to become system charter. But all of that would be included in their charter proposal. And as it relates to the budget, we would still be funding those step increases. The school district would simply have the flexibility to determine how to spend it.
25?
So, in this figure, I wanted to make sure I understood that. So, with respect to Gwinnett, we did fund the step increase, but they did not award it to their teachers.
Well, the first part, yes, ma'am. We are proposing to fund it, and we will be funding it. And what Gwinnett County is doing in relation to step increases is specific to their plan. I know from having looked at it last year, and I don't know what they're doing this year, I know that Gwinnett County had chosen to decide how they would pay teachers that were in difficult to staff positions like math and science. I'll have to get back to you on whether or not they're actually paying.
Well, I did read that they in fact chose not to award step increases.
Yes, ma'am.
But I didn't realize, I guess I wasn't at the time thinking that we had funded them, but yet they didn't award them. I was thinking, I don't know. Obviously we awarded it, but they chose not to provide them.
Yes, ma'am. So we do fund, and that's one of the aspects of the charter, the IE squared contract. We do fund the T&E growth, and then they have the flexibility to spend that per whatever's in their charter or whatever's in their IE squared contract.
Thank
If I may, Mr. Chairman, the RESA formula, or the RESA program, is being reduced, appears 3%. And the only point I'd like to make there is that the intent was to not reduce the Math Mentor portion of the RESA program. So we will be reducing the Ed Tech Center portion, and then the actual RESA formula there's a sub-program under the RESA program, which is the formula, which is really the operating monies for the RESA. And then there were two additional sub-programs that came online a bit later. They are the Math Mentor monies and then the Ed Tech or technology monies. And those are funds that go to the RESAs, but the specific purpose of those monies that go to the RESAs are either for math or for Ed Tech Center type activities.
Have they been funded like Ag Ed, where they've been receiving their funds with that anticipation of that cut, or is this going to be a pretty big hit for them in the last quarter of the year?
Denise, do you know if we reduced their... Oftentimes with the RESAs, we communicate with them. They often are familiar. We're talking about the RESAs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the services I'm talking about with the Math Mentors and
Right. I understand
those are
the
for
Math
the RESAs,
Mentors.
and we tend to keep them informed of what's going on, and they tend to know what's going on. We don't always reduce their allocations preemptively because there's a relatively small number of them. And so as we get through the year, we try to communicate what's going on, and they tend to be able to adjust.
Okay. You will let me know about that one?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay.
The school improvement program has a reduction that is reflective of capturing funds for one staff member. And the intent is to not hire that person for the balance of the year. I believe looking at the 14 budget, the intent would be to allow that person to be hired in 14, but to capture the savings of surplus and not hire anybody for the balance of this fiscal year. SED, there is no change. And again, this is SED, as a reminder, is very similar to QBE. It's a student-based formula, and so the governor is holding them harmless from the 3% reduction, if you will. The State Charter Commission Schools Administration, this is a new program that the governor is introducing for the 13 supplemental budget, and the intent is to provide $130,000 in startup funds for the commission. The State Board of Education in January, approved the commission members and the appointments of those commission members. And I believe they're having their first working session tomorrow. And in that session, they'll start to make determinations about who their director might be, etc. As we look to the 14 budget, we know that the governor will not be continuing to put these kinds of state dollars in. The intent for next year, and the reason he's referring to these fiscal year 13 budget numbers as startup, is because in 14 the commission charters are actually able to charge the recipient commission schools. So there's a portion of up to 3% that they're able to take as offset to the cost of administration for those schools. But for this year, because there's no ability for them to recapture any of the funds that have already gone out to the state special charter schools, the governor's putting in the startup funding.
Okay.
The state interagency transfers, there is a reduction of $400,000. That's the teacher retirement reduction. I can say that the Department of Education doesn't calculate the number. I think that's the best estimate, my understanding, and so it's put into our budget, and it's one of those, it is what it is based on how many teachers we have, and the teacher retirement system tells us the cost. I believe that last year there was $400,000 overfunded. Now, the year prior to that, there was a need for additional funds. So I believe what the governor was looking at was last year's number, and if they had funds remaining last year, then they're capturing that in this year's formula. It is an amount, however, that could potentially be underfunded if TRS tells us toward the end of the year that the amount has increased. But we don't calculate the number, and I'm sure the budget offices are talking about that, and we'll be happy to assist in that conversation if you'd like.
State schools?
The state schools, there's a very small reduction to the state schools, and say, again, we appreciate the governor's intent here is to actually hold the state schools harmless as he did QBE and equalization and SED. The state schools, of course, these are the 3 state schools where the Department of Education actually has students. The small reductions that you see reflected in the tracking document relate more to budgetary changes. The $16,000 reduction is for reduction in liability insurance. It's not intended and will not have any impact on school operations or direct instruction. The technology and career ed, this is a 3% reduction. Again, this is very similar to Ag Ed, where we would prefer, if possible, to get the language and the ability to move these funds among the sub-programs as would be most appropriate to protect those sub-programs that are directly impactful of student direct instruction. In testing, the next program, the governor is not recommending a reduction, and I want to say that that is because we know with the Common Core there are potentially large expenditures coming with PARC or some of the other tests that we may or may not as a state choose to enter into. So at this point in time, the Department of Education is continuing to develop in both the CRCT and the end-of-course tests that are aligned to the Common Core and tests that have been updated for the GPS, the Georgia Performance Standards. And so not reducing it as a reflection of the continuing cost of developing additional questions, and it is not a reflection of wanting to protect direct instruction. This was simply one of those areas where we see higher cost, not lower, and therefore we did not recommend a reduction, and the governor is not recommending a reduction.
I believe that's the last area within a change. Questions from the committee? I don't understand how you're getting that with no questions, but thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members.
Members of the audience who would like to speak. Yes, ma'am. Please give us your name and your association.
My name is Mary Frances Williams, and I'm here on behalf of the Georgia School Nutrition Association. Thank you so much for this opportunity to make just brief comments. I think you're all pretty well aware of where we stand. As Mr. Austinson noted, the cut that to state school nutrition funds is in the budget at 7%, and we had hoped to stay at least at 3%. We know we have to take our share. More than that's hard. These funds were initially, this formula is kind of a strange formula, but it was drafted, and it says in the law that this was to help defray the cost for children who pay for school lunch. And I will say that it is true that school lunch prices have gone up for like the past 3 years, partly because of the new rules from the feds. But I'm told that as the prices have gone up, participation among paying students is down 18%, which is pretty dramatic. And my nutrition directors tell me that when they raise prices, it does price some folks out.
Is that a statewide average you're talking about?
Yes, sir. That's what I've been told. I will have some numbers for you, but that's what I was told over the phone today. I'm also going to try and get a breakdown of system by system what it would cost these different school systems. But this has the loss of states funds it hampers different schools differently, because depending on the number of free and reduced students, if you have more free and reduced lunch students, you get more federal funds. So for the school systems who don't have as many low-income kids, they have a bigger gap to make up from what they get from the federal funds and what it takes to serve these meals. And of course, as you know, we're trying really harder to do more fresh fruits and vegetables. There's new federal guidelines, and of course, we're trying to work more closely with local Georgia growers, do more farm to school, and that just all costs money. I mean, to serve good, healthy meals, it just costs money. And so we certainly want to do our share in terms of taking cuts that everybody else has to cut, but would hope to keep it at 3%. So that's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take you, and then I think Herb Garrett will be next. Come on, Al.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Helen Sloat. I'm here with Nelson Mullins, Raleigh, and Scarborough, and we represent Multi-Agency Alliance for Children and Youth Villages. We're concerned about the proposed cut to the non-QBE formula grants for residential treatment centers. As you know, these are the centers that take Georgia's kids that are sometimes in custody of DFACS or DJJ. We have appreciated the committee's willingness to work with us and our schools that we represent. We appreciate the work, too, of the State Education Funding Commission in trying to find a long-term resolution of the funding for these centers. As you know, this pot of money has been historically underfunded. There's about $3.8 million, I believe, left now in the grant program for these particular centers. Again, we just would appreciate if those monies could be restored. I know it's lean times, and we understand that everybody has to take a haircut every now and then, but we would love to continue to work with you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for just a moment to mention three things in the budget. One, I'd like to take off whatever lobbyist or GSSA hat that I wear and put on the parent hat and encourage you to do whatever it takes to continue to support the Governor's Honors Program. My daughter had the privilege of participating in that program. It's been some years ago, and I've had a chance to be connected to it as a dad, but also as during my years as a high school principal and even as a superintendent. And I still think it's probably one of the best things we do as a state, and anything that we can do to support that program, I hope we'll do it. The second is not so much about the cut that's in this year's budget, but you mentioned it already, and that's the sparsity grant. I know that that's one of those things that it kind of gets invisible and gets invisible pretty quickly. But to the systems that rely on that, it can be a big deal in a small systems budget. I'll give you the name of the superintendent that you're the most likely to hear from. Those of you who have been around the General Assembly for a long time remember Senator Reagan, and his son is the superintendent in a small system in South Georgia, and the sparsity grant's a big part of their budget. So for whatever it's worth, when the time comes to talk about that in next year's, because the cut that's recommended in 14, of course, is a pretty substantial one to that small program, but it's a big deal to those districts. And then the final one, of course, is the thing, Mr. Chairman, that you asked the question about, and that's the $45,000 cut that's in both this year's and next year's budget for the Superintendent Professional Development Program. I'd like to at least give you a little bit of the history behind that so you'll know what it is, because in most places it just looks like another line on a budget. What happened is that in 1992, when the Constitution was changed to provide that all boards would be elected and all superintendents would be appointed, there was no organization, whether the Department of Education or university or anywhere else, that was attempting to provide any sort of training, any sort of leadership training for local school superintendents. And the Georgia School Superintendents Association, in cooperation with DOE and the Georgia Power Foundation, decided to develop that training program. And what it is it's a 2-year-long program. It's typically 25 participants. They give us a weekend a month for 2 years. It's a leadership development program that certainly there are some specifics in the training. There are things like how to manage budgets, how to develop capital expenditure programs, personnel management, all of the kinds of things that you might imagine in a leadership development program. And it is funded through a combination of some money that we put in from our association's budget. It's funded partly by some tuition payments from the participants in the program. And it's been funded, of course, the Georgia Power Foundation has put $20,000 a year in it every year for the last 20 years. And the Department of Education has put in money into it for the last 20 years, too. It truly has been a partnership. And so while it's recommended for reduction here, and even if it's reduced, I'll have to admit we'll try to find a way to continue the program because it is a quality program. As a matter of fact, one of the previous speakers who stood at this podium just a little while ago is a graduate of that program. Mr. Henson went through that training program and was a very successful superintendent himself. So if there's a way to restore that funding in both this budget and the next, it would be much appreciated.
Thank you. You got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Starting with Representative Lindsay.
Yes, sir.
It is so nice to begin this year being able to agree with my friend from the Georgia School Superintendent Association as to the issue of the Governor's Honors Program.
Yes, sir.
Which I believe is to be an outstanding program in this state, and I say that based on all the evidence I've seen, and just a little bit because I'm a 1976 graduate of that program. I do think we need to make sure we have money available to reward our best of the best. And
I wish we could put it back to the 6 weeks, don't you? But I guess that right now that's just not realistic.
It may not be possible right now, but I certainly hope that can be a priority in the future.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that.
We appreciate the alumni who are going to be supporting that. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will also concur with what the whip said about the Governor's Honors Program. My husband participated many years ago in the six-week program and still talks about it. Right. I had a question on the superintendent's training program. What is the total budget for that for a year, including the tuition, the Georgia Power supplement, the state's portion, and the superintendent's portion?
Can I do a little quick figuring here? I'm guessing, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, that budget is somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 a year.
And you said about 25 people.
25 people over a 2-year period. It's a weekend-long program for the 9 months of the school year.
So, this Georgia Power does 20,000. How much does Do you have a document that you could supply that would list out
Yes, ma'am.
what all the sources of money are?
I do. I
and
will.
kind of the budget, how it's spent?
I will. I will bring that to you.
Thank
Yes, ma'am. Bring it tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Garrett? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Betsy Green, and I'm the Executive Director for the Georgia Youth Science and Technology Centers. And I'm before you because there's a recommended cut of $36,000 in the budget for us. That may seem like a little bit of money, but it's a lot of money to us. We operate annually off of a budget of about $1.2 million. And with $1.2 million, majority of it is leverage from other sources other than the state. Those dollars that you give, we're able to go out and leverage about $10 for every dollar the state invests. We were able to serve, just in 2012 alone, over 8,000 teachers with the investment that you made, and about 85,000 students. And I'm just here to request that you give favorable consideration to restoring those funds. Thank you.
$10 for every dollar that the state puts in?
Yes. Okay.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, we thank you for your attendance, your attention, and your input. And we will adjourn this meeting.